Greetings, my fellow software test engineers, and welcome to the Software Test Automation Revealed YouTube channel, or STAR for short, hosted by me, Cody Gibson. This is episode 1, all about Fluent Style Test Coding. Now, if you've been following me, you know I released episode 1 last week, but then I got to thinking about it and decided, what I recorded last week was much too long, kind of rambling, so I'm going to redo episode 1. I'm going to keep it very, very short. Try to keep it down to less than 15 minutes. So what are the problems with typical test coding style? Well, you've got little to no coding style consistency, which can make it difficult to read and understand, and make it difficult to maintain, which of course leads to much higher test maintenance costs. Here's an example of a common small test. This one is much too simple. You've got just a single line of code, and you really can't tell what is this test doing. How is it navigating through the application and validating that the application is behaving correctly? On the other extreme, you've got a large test. This one is so long and complex, it's very, very difficult to understand just what it's doing. I'd have to spend probably at least 10 minutes trying to go through it and read it to understand what are all the steps it's doing. So that leads us to the question of what is Fluent Style Test Coding? Well, Fluent Style Test Coding, also known as method chaining, is an object-oriented coding style in which you create various objects and wire them up together in such a way that one method directly flows into another method. This Fluent Style Coding was originally introduced in about 2005 by a guy named Martin Fowler. He published an essay entitled The Fluent Style Interface, and I'll include a link to his presentation in the description. Today, Microsoft Link uses the Fluent Style Coding like this. The advantages of Fluent Style Test Coding is that you can use IntelliSense to decide what to do next. Junior programmers can easily create tests because the IntelliSense guides them from one step to the next. This greatly speeds up test creation, and test code is much simpler and easier to read. Tests are easier to maintain as well. Here's an example of a Fluent Style test. You notice how simple, straightforward this is. My idea of a perfect test case is one in which I can look at the test steps, and within 30 seconds, I understand exactly what it's doing. Now, there are some rules in order to do good Fluent Style Test Coding. You need to start off with this model. You should concentrate on modularity by creating test projects in these 4 major modules. You've got your core, which contains all of your extensions, your base classes, and utility classes. Then up from that, you will have your data models. Data models do not contain code. This is going to be used by the rest of the test project. Now you've got your pages. These are going to be what you call page objects. Page objects represent individual pages in the web application that you're going to be testing. And then finally, at the highest level, you actually have your tests. This is where you're going to have your Fluent Style tests. All right, now let's go have some look at some code. But first, if you do me a favor, would you click that like and subscribe button so YouTube knows what content to suggest for you, as well as the notification bell so that you can be notified as I create new content for you. All right, the code right here. Up here you can see I have got my 4 major modules. There I've got my core module, I've got my models, I've got my pages, and I've got my tests, just like I described. In core, I've got all of my base classes and utilities and extensions. I'm not going to cover these in today's part 1 YouTube video. I'll cover these in part 3. And in the models, I don't have any models at this time, but we will be in the future adding data models in here to be used by the tests. And then in my pages, yes, I've got one page after another page after another page. These are all the pages of the application we will be testing. And then lastly, yes, I've got my test. Now, I've only got one actual test defined right now. We're going to be building on this in the future. So let's have a look at the application I chose to test. It's called ProDinner. It's really just a demo application. It's not a real well, it's a real application, but it's a demo app. It does not actually do anything real for real customers. We've got this home page. We've also got a meals page where you can actually create meals. You then have this drop-down menu in which you have a chef page and a country page and a dinner page, as well as a feedback page. Let's have a look at the chef page real quick. List of chefs in a database. Then we have country, which is also like a list of countries, also in a table format. Then you've got dinners, another one in a table format. And finally, we have feedback, which is a feedback form, just like a real application would have a feedback form. All right. Then it also has an about page, but we're not going to automate this about page in this episode. We'll automate it in a future episode. The about page, all it does is bring up this modal dialog, this overlay. This is difficult to work with, and I want to stick with just the basics for right now. All right, now let's go back to our code. So let's look at this Fluent Style test. It starts off with ProDinner. That's an object. That object gets magically created here in this base class, this base star web tests. Then you notice we've got this method chaining. We're saying navigate to home, do an action 1, do an action 2, then navigate to meals, do a meals action, navigate to chefs and do chef actions. Navigate to countries, do country actions, navigate to dinners and do dinner actions, navigate to feedback and do feedback actions. All right, you want to guys see this execute? Let me show that to you. All right, we need to go to Test Explorer and I do a right click and I can just simply say run. Now it's currently configured for Chrome. I'll show you how to configure it for different browsers. I click run. And we can see that's Chrome launching and it's loading the page. It's going to resize the page to fit inside the window. And there it is going through, went to the home page. Now it's going to the meals. Now we're going to go next to chef page, followed by the country page, followed by the dinner and the feedback. And we are done. That was it. It all worked perfectly. The test passed. Notice we can click on this link to see additional actions. So if you notice, we logged all of these actions that were being done, and I'll show you how those were logged. That was done within the pages class. So like in chef pages, we have this method called chef action 1. Now you notice it's not doing anything for real. All it's doing is it's logging, hey, I did chef action 1 and then chef action 2. Now, one of the important rules to note is you must return a page object. You can return the same one or you can return a different page object. This one is just returning the same page object for simplicity at this episode. In the future, let's say I had a step that went from page 1 to page 2. I would have to return a new page object for page 2, whatever that page is. And this method is active. I will cover this in a future episode, so don't worry about it for right now. The structure is basically the same for all of these other pages. I have my country action, returning the page object. Then I've got my dinner action, returning, doing its action steps and also returning the page object. The same for the feedback, the same for the home page, the same for the meals, and that's it. Now, these two classes we'll get to, or these two files I will get to in just a moment. Now, let's go back to the main class. This ProDinner. I said this is created using a little bit of magic in this base class. Let me go to its definition so you can see just how this is worked. You notice this is a protected object, so it is inherited by every test class that inherits from this base star classes. I'm not going to get into this base web test in this part 1 episode. I'll get into this in part 3 of episode 1. Now, these tests are NUnit based. Notice this setup attribute. What that does is it tells NUnit, please run this setup section before you run the test. So the first thing it does is it calls a base test initialize, and it passes in a URL. This is the home page, the starting URL for our application to be tested. And we're also passing it in what driver type. This driver type would be Chrome or Firefox or Edge or Internet Explorer. And in episode 2, I will talk about configuration. Where does this settings come from? For right now, let's skip this. Next thing it's doing is it's adding a cookie. What this is doing is it's telling the application, hey, I've already accepted that cookie consent dialog, that little blue thing, if you saw it, that showed up at the bottom of the web page when it first started up. Then I am refreshing the page so that accept cookies dialog is gone automatically. Then I am capturing the host. This is something I want to capture so I can be using it later in my tests. And then I am setting the value of this ProDinner object. Notice I am creating a new Pages ProDinner app object. This is fairly important. And I'm passing it this so that it knows, hey, this is a pointer to the current test that is executing. This will be important as your test needs to reference variables and values of the currently executing test. Now let's have a look at this Premiere app. What is so special about this Premiere app? Okay. At the moment, really nothing special, but it does need to be common. All of your page objects, your applications need to be inherent from some type of app, which will then be inheriting from another base, which is this ProDinner page. Now, we need to inherit from this ProDinner page in order for this is like the glue holding everything together. Now let's have a look at a ProDinner page. All right, ProDinner page has a number of things. It's deriving from a navigation provider as well as an interface, an iPage interface. We have a couple of common page elements. So we have one to grab all of the HTML off the current page. We have another one. This one would capture the About dialog if it shows up on the page. Then we have our constructor, and it's also calling the base navigation provider. In our constructor, basically all this does is it tries to capture the About page. So we are deliberately setting the implicit wait timeout to 0 so that if the About dialog does not appear, if it's not there, we're not going to be sitting here waiting and waiting on an implicit wait yes, we're not going to be sitting and waiting here on an implicit wait for the WebDriver to find that div. Because if it can't find the div, it's going to wait for our timeout period for that div to appear. So that could be a long delay. By setting our implicit wait, it's not going to wait at all. It's going to immediately return if the div does not exist. So if it doesn't exist, this variable will be set to 0. We will skip capturing the About div, the pointer to it, and we'll move on. So here, now we just restore the implicit wait back to the default element load time span. That default comes from our application settings, which I will cover in part 2. And then Here I am calling the assert is true. So let's go ahead and cover that. It's the assert is true, the is active is a virtual method. Every page contains an is active. And what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that the URL is the correct URL. The home page, if you look carefully, it has no extension on it. Versus, let's say, feedback. It has feedback at the end of it. That's what's different. So every time we navigate to a new page, we are actually going to do this assert to verify we are moved onto the correct page. And because it's an override, it's the base class will call the correct override for whichever page we navigate to. Now let's go back to our ProDinner page. This is deriving from our ProDinner navigation provider. Now this is important, and let me show you why this is important. In here, we are going to have our public methods, which is for all of the common navigations. So no matter what page I'm on, I can navigate to a different page. So if I'm on the home page, I can navigate to the meals. If I'm on the meals, I can navigate to chefs, or I can navigate to home. No matter what page I'm on, I can navigate to a different page. So you're going to want to put all of your common navigation methods into this base navigation provider, or this ProDinner navigation provider. Now this one is more glue. I'll cover that in part 3 of this episode 1. All right, and that's it. That's how we do all of this method. That's how we put together all of the tests, this Fluent Style Test. So, you know, this ProDinner, when by the time we get here, this ProDinner is already been set up, and it has all of the base classes and all of the glue, so that all of these navigations work very, very well for you. Now, let me show you one more thing. How quickly and easily it would be to recreate this test using the IntelliSense. All right, so let's go ahead and add a new class here into the star tests. We're going to add new class. All right, namely, I'll just leave it as the default class 1 for right now. And we need to copy a few things. Let's close this star page in this ProDinner. Okay. I want to copy some of this, but not all of this. All of this part right here. Okay. And we'll call this star test 2 to eliminate conflict. All right, and let's go ahead and put these side by side to help us. Okay, so now I can simply type .navigate to home, and I can select it like that, add opening and closing, and then I can say home action 1. See, the IntelliSense is prompting me on just what I want to do. Home action 2. Now I can say navigate to my meals page. There's meals. And then meals action 1 and 2. Now notice this thing is context sensitive. I'm not being offered things to do on the home page or the chef page or the feedback page. I'm only getting the methods that are available on the current page. So we'll do action 1 meals action 2. All right, and I think that's going to be enough. We'll just go ahead and end it right there. All right, we need to import some using statements, and that should be it. And let's go ahead and reformat it so it looks pretty. And we need to add a closing brace. Okay, do the build succeeded. Now that I've got this all together, we can go to our Test Explorer. Here's our test 2, and it will run. After this, I'll show you how easy it is to switch and run the test in a different browser. There's our test running. This is our brand new test. Worked perfectly. Test pass. All right, settings for configuration. Let's go ahead and close this back up. All of the configuration for running tests is stored in this app settings.json. For right now, I'm only going to talk about this star driver type. This driver type, as documented, it could be Chrome or Firefox or Edge or Internet Explorer. So let's try changing this to Firefox. The rest of these values I'll talk about in part 2 of episode 1. How does this configuration work? What do these all do? All right, so now let's go back to our Test Explorer and go back to test 1, and let's go ahead and run this, and we'll see this run in Firefox. So that, if you recognize it, that is the Firefox browser launching and executing. So the exact same test runs in Firefox, runs very, very quickly as well. All right, let's do two more actually. That was Firefox, Edge. Okay, we just changed the value to Edge, and now I can run the test, and it will launch and run in Edge. There, that's the Edge browser launching, going to the home page, going through all of the pages, just like the test tells it to. And one more. Let's go ahead and run our test in Internet Explorer. Let's just do copy and paste. There we go. That's all it takes to change from one browser to the next. Whoops, I clicked debug by accident. So it's running in debug mode. If I hit any breakpoints, we'll just tell it to continue. There, that's Internet Explorer running the exact same test. All right, it's almost done. And we can see how quickly that executed in all 4 browsers. All right, so thanks so much for paying attention. That's the end of the demo. And I look forward to seeing you in episode 2 or episode 1, part 2, and part 3, which I'll be doing here next. And once again, don't forget to click that like and subscribe button so YouTube will offer you additional videos like this, as well as the notification bell, so you will be notified as I produce part 2 and part 3, as well as episode 2. Thanks much for listening.